Good morning and welcome to the Budget Committee meeting of Tuesday, February 1st, 2022, starting at 9:30 a.m. or actually 9:36. I'm going to call this meeting to order. Do we have any provision for disclosure of community interest and general nature thereof? Seeing none, we're going to move right into our departmental presentations, starting with community transportation, and welcome Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Warden. I'll just let Greg pull this up here. All right, so some of you have, or most of you, I think, have been part of the past community transportation presentations. So some of this might be a little bit of repetitive information, but just to give you some background information. Sorry, Greg, next slide. I'll have to remember that. So the County of Middlesex is a partner with our funding for this project received through the Province of Ontario's Community Transportation Grant Program. We received this funding starting back in, I believe, 2018 with funding, the past funding going to 2023. And this was we applied for this. As many of you know, the county does have limited to non-existent public transit options for its residents. And this gap has really impacted the ability for people to get to job interviews, employment opportunities, education, medical appointments, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please, Greg. And with the fact that the County of Middlesex, as you know, continues to increase in population, and regional transportation issues and the need to get ahead of this rapid growth is only becoming increasingly important for us. The solution to rural transit is a complex issue. It's certainly not a one-size-fits-all approach. We've had a challenge with exploring financially sustainable transit solutions that best serve our small rural areas while still offering connections to the wider region, that being the City of London, and the extensions that the city provides for getting to other areas of the province. And we've only seen the impacts of COVID-19 on the service adding to this already existing complexity. These are some of the things that we believe in terms of support and advocacy that will ensure that rural transportation endeavors are to be successful and sustainable into the future as, like I said, Middlesex County continues to grow. So that includes obviously pilot projects like this community transportation grant program, relationship and partnership building, and long-term commitment from all levels of government, as well as with that support for a connected regional transit network that I'll get into later in this presentation. So just a little bit of the current status of the project. So we did launch sort of right in the middle of that COVID-19 pandemic in September of 2020, which did negatively impact the ridership we had projected during the first about 10 months of service. So as you can see on that graph there, quite low ridership for that time frame. We did see in the middle of last year, starting in July, August timeframe, ridership started to build as restrictions were eased in the province. And it did grow and remain steady for the remainder of 2021 for our Route 1 and 2 schedules. The Route 3 struggled definitely for the remainder of the year. And we do have a change that we're going to make to that Route 3 that I'll discuss later. And then just a little bit more on the current status. So again, with that uptick in ridership, we definitely attribute that to the increased marketing and promotions of the service that our team engaged in through the second half of 2021. So that included a promotional video that we put out on CTV News, as well as campaigns with online, which gathered about 10,000 views online. We did radio advertisements both in the summer and in December of 2021. We did a bunch of social media campaigns that also continue right now. We have an upcoming ride guide brochure that was brought to our attention to have more physical presence in the community. So having those at the stop locations, they're currently in production, and we should be seeing those out in the next couple of weeks, as well as the promotional banners that we're going to put in the Thames Centre Libraries, community centers, as well as at Fanshawe College. And another piece that we're working on right now is having our transit data uploaded to Google Transit. A couple other SCT members have already done so. So we're working with a member of the county's planning department to get this transit data up there, which will allow people, you can pick up your phone and type in where you want to go, and our routes will show up there for people. So that'll be an exciting thing coming up as well. Like I said, promotions will continue as restrictions ease throughout this month and next, giving us the opportunity to engage with residents and businesses out in the community, have more of a physical presence, like I said, and gather their input and feedback on the future of the service enhancements and alterations. And then just as a quick note to something that we did recently that I'm sure most of you have heard, back in December, there was the Magic of the Lights show that happened at Longwoods out in Mount Bridges. So we were able to, with the support of Voyago and sponsorship from the Visit Middlesex team, we were able to provide free transportation to residents from Dorchester and Thorndale out to the Magic of the Lights show. And we had about 50 people take part in that initiative, a lot of them being seniors and children or families with young children. And it was a really successful event, and we did get a lot of positive feedback from the community. So that only reinforced, showing that there is a need for people to have this transportation option available for things like this, but also, like I said, doing something that is out in the community different from the current schedules and routes that we have in place every day. So just a nice little pick-me-up for people in that stressful time last month. So just a quick funding update. Like I said, the original funding was from 2018 to 2023. We received extended support. We were notified of that last year, that the funding will be extended between 2023 to 2025, which, like I said, has only been vital to getting past the issues that have impacted us with COVID-19, so that we can continue our efforts and future planning of the service into the coming years. So with this extension in the Community Transportation Grant funding and the potential for the Rural Transit Solutions Fund funding that I'll get into, we are positioned to better address both the challenges and opportunities to transportation in the county. And as well as the program also communicated that we will have increased flexibility in the use of the funds to help ensure the sustainability of the service moving past the program. And so that includes flexibility to reallocate unused funding at the end of year 5 to those extended years 6 and 7, as well as flexibility to reallocate funding allocations between years 6 and 7. So I'm sure a lot of you are aware of the numerous transit initiatives that are happening in our region, which only will help us build a stronger and connected rural transportation network that will include Middlesex County and the County Connect service. So the City of London developed a conceptual framework, and it was actually released just in December. The report was released to their Civic Works Committee that developed a framework for a hub that would link the rail, regional buses, rapid transit, and other mobility options at a downtown location in London. So just a quick summary of that report. Basically, they outlined secondary hubs. I believe there's 4 of them that are on the outside of the city. So that includes one in the Masonville area, one in East London, one in the Wellington corridor, as well as one, I believe, Oxford and Wonderland area. So those bigger, more populated areas of the city. Those secondary hubs would then connect with a primary hub in downtown London, which is that sort of Via Rail York Street corridor area. I don't think an exact location has been determined, but that's their plan for the future. There hasn't been any funding confirmed for that. Like I said, it's just a conceptual framework, but we were able to meet with their team at the City of London that were working on this project, and just had a really positive conversation, I think, about just getting our residents into the City of London connecting to those secondary hubs so that they can then travel downtown to London, which going into that would link them to the GO train service extension that currently happened in southwestern Ontario that provides weekday trips between London and Toronto. That's one piece that's sort of in the works. I don't have a timeline for, like I said, it's just a framework right now, but just like I said, we do have some positive conversations happening between us and them, and they're really open to our ideas and what we need. So that's nice to see. And then we also always have ongoing conversations and planning with other regional Southwest Community Transit members. So speaking with like I said, Strathroy, on their current project status. So they're running from Sarnia into London, and they've had quite a good uptake of people doing that, with I think about half of their riders traveling to downtown London. So again, that just highlights what people need these services for, and helps us with our planning going into the future. And as well, SCORE applied to the Rural Transit Solutions Fund to complete a service review that would maximize the efficiencies and encourage the consolidation and sustainability of all of the SCT intercommunity transit systems. So that's something that we also applied to that I'll talk about, but currently we're not sure of the status of that. None of us have heard back from that fund yet. But basically, like I said, all of these things just sort of tie together and highlight that at all levels of government, there's the transportation talk happening, and having the support of all levels of government will only be more important going forward as we move into these last couple of years of the community transportation grant funding. So like I've mentioned, so the RTSF, so the Rural Transit Solutions Fund, is something that we applied for in October of 2021 with the goal of conducting a needs assessment and planning for the development of a more demand-responsive transportation option for the county. So this would help us identify and address the opportunities that exist for a sustainable rural transit solution that is appropriate for our local region, with the recommendations from this planning and design project positively contributing to the future development of the entire region and ensuring that our rural communities we serve are supported by a sustainable foundation that is connected and thriving. Like I said, we're currently waiting to hear back on the approval of these funds, but pending a decision on this, of course, other funding opportunities will be explored by us to ensure that we are able to complete a needs assessment of some sort, because we do believe that on-demand is sort of the future of the transportation network in the county. It would definitely allow us to connect residents to the future hub in London that I talked about, and which would only increase the accessibility to employment, education, and other regional opportunities. Adding on demand as an enhancement to the current service would help fill the gaps that fixed routes cannot fulfill, and enhancements like this can ensure that vulnerable populations, like those living in low density areas and people unable to access stop-based transit, have access to proper transportation for their daily life, including education, appointments, employment, etc. So we are currently in the process of acquiring an app technology software that will give us the ability to operate an on-demand transportation system, and we're working on this in conjunction with SCORE and other SCT members. We did have an app provider in place last year, but unfortunately they pulled out sort of at the last minute on all of our groups. So we're working right now with each other to find another app provider that will be able to fulfill this for us. Without the app, we won't be able to operate on-demand transit, so it is a really important piece for us this year to sort of nail that down and get that going. But with that being said, starting this Saturday, actually, we're going to pilot an on-demand style service for our Saturday schedule. So like I said, and as you saw in that chart with our ridership levels, Saturday really didn't take off in any way, and we left it like that for a little bit just to see how it would go once restrictions were eased, but it still wasn't something that people were taking. So with this option, riders will be able to call and book a specific time for pickup on Saturdays, and they'll be able to travel between any of our locations in Thames Centre and London on Saturday afternoons between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. So this, for us, will really just test the uptake and demand for this type of service model to see how, first of all, how it works, and work out any sort of issues that might be related to this kind of approach, and then also see if this is something that our residents are interested in. And we can also use this as an option to explore the ability and sustainability of this type of model to our other routes and times of day. Like I said, this is only for Saturdays, but looking into the future, we definitely want to see something like this for our other days of the week as well. So just some more future planning. So like I mentioned, there are a lot of issues and barriers related to transportation that have been identified in the county through past research and studies. So The 2021 to 2022 Middlesex Workforce Development Partnership Plan calls for supporting employers in addressing and reducing barriers to engage the local workforce. And the county's economic development strategy also notes that the lack of transportation options in the county is a barrier to retaining and attracting talent and poses challenges for capitalizing on future economic opportunities. So something that we're working on, we're committed to collaboration and open dialogue with other regional SDT members. So like I said, we connect with obviously the Strathroy service. There's connection points between Perth and Stratford and that sort of thing. So we'll definitely continue our conversations with those groups, as well as engage the workforce development groups and local employers in our region as we sort of work through enhancing and evaluating the current service. To ensure that we develop a connected transportation network for the region that supports these employers and their initiatives to ensure that they can engage the local workforce and have people get out to these job locations, and they're not sort of fighting for or losing out on the ability to attract talent to these places. So our service is currently integrated in the Workforce Planning and Development Board Regional Job Map, and job seekers can view our routes and the jobs that are along the route paths. We have conducted previous focus groups and surveys with the Thames Center businesses, which that survey identified that at the current time they weren't interested in a dedicated business transportation route. And we will have future conversations with the Workforce Planning and Development Board and employers, as this is vital to the transportation planning related to the current funding, the future potential RTFS funding, and beyond. So looking toward the future following the completion of this funding, sustainability of the system, like I said, will require advocacy work at all levels of our government. We're going to strive for partnerships and relationship building at the government level, as well as with our neighboring communities and business communities as we explore future transportation funding beyond the Community Transportation Grant Program. We will continue to work with other SCT members on increasing our connection points between the services and exploring other opportunities for collaboration and shared benefits. We will engage with the Workforce Planning and Development Boards and local employers as we explore potential changes to the service to ensure future sustainability. And we will also collaborate and continue to engage with the City of London, like I said, as they develop a plan for bus rapid transit, the regional transportation hub, and other future network building opportunities. And with that, I will open it to some questions or comments from anyone. Thank you.
Cindy, go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. I guess before we go into comments, I just want to point out, if you remember, originally we received the $1.5 million from the province. In our business plan, we also put in a little bit of revenue for our fares. So as we move forward, it's really important. What Taylor talked about was that flexibility in funding, how we can move it forward. And if you, we also received the extension from the province, and that was about $928,000. That will lead us into 2025. I will point out that the budget shows, which is our original allocation that we showed to the ministry in our transfer payment agreement of the $371,250. However, we do have additional funds because in the first few years we didn't spend all the money because of COVID, because it took us a little bit longer to implement the system. So we're able to put that money into deferred revenue, and we're able to use that as we need it in the system. So when we want to try pilot projects like we did this summer with the Festival of Lights, we're able to take from that deferred revenue and use it in the service for projects to really support the system, really get individuals, families, and residents using our system, getting comfortable with the system. So we do have some flexibility in order to show that we can put out a system that works. It also will allow us some flexibility to try some of that on-demand transportation.
Yeah, and I think, having dealt with this extensively between the minister, Carolyn Maroney, they're very receptive to suggestions into what's happening on the ground. And, obviously, and I've said it a million times, it's to be able to try and have a transit system when the province is telling everybody to stay home is a little ironic and hard to do. But it is, we're getting the ear of the minister. She does recognize the challenges that we're having, not just with the pandemic, but with staffing issues, with bus drivers, with the cost of fuel, the different challenges that have been coming out of this, and have been very responsive. And the hybrid route, I think, is a great start. And working on platforms such as Google Transit, which just make it easier for people to understand the routes and how they can connect. And then looking at a pay system where, you don't have to have $5 exactly in your purse when you get there, but you can just use, like, as you said, Taylor, like the Square or something that, everybody can jump in on. It is going to really make this good. And I think it must have been very hard for anybody, such as yourself, Taylor, who basically your job is to try and get this transit system going, and to know that there is some job security to 2025 for people like you out there that are planning and working on this. The government does have faith that it's going to work. So, and it doesn't matter who you talk to or when you talk to, as far as what ministry, whether it could be Monty McNaughton's portfolio, they know that transportation is an integral piece of what they're doing, what they're trying to do. He did give us a really good example. I'm not sure, Kathy, were you on that call when he was talking about there was some students from, I think it was Walpole, or anyway, there was 10 students that were involved in a skill program, and they needed transportation, and that was the key piece to get them to where they needed to get there. So everybody recognizes the importance. Good job that you're doing, and it's been frustrating, but keep it up. CEO Rayburn?
Quick, I'm prone to do these days, walk down memory lane. And my first year here, we did a assessment with the library where we asked people, what is it about Middlesex County you would like to see? And there was a group of social service groups. Carrie, you remember this because you were there actually. It was in my first little period here at the county, a couple of years. And transit was like here, and other things were here. Remember, Kara? And the big challenge back then was sustainability, of course, because they were trying to do it with duct tape and binder twine, and it was hard to build a ridership. And for a long period of time, I think the brain trust around here has had trouble figuring out how this can be sustainable, especially since transit funding wasn't focused on rural areas, it was focused on urban. So I think there's a lot we have to do in the next years. And what I mean by that is we can't just assume that this is the end product. We have to continue to adapt, continue to iterate. Cindy knows this isn't my dream of what transit looks like in the county. My dream is different than a bus and how this works. But she's been able to convince me that we have to build up the ridership and we have to build the routes, and then we can implement phase 2 and 3. That's going to take money because there's no guarantee, I don't think, that we're going to have enough money. But the difference between today and 15 years ago is if there was a job in Glencoe and someone needed transportation from Burr to get there, they would figure it out on their own with private transportation. The challenge we have today is that whole group of the employable is off doing other things in big factories and big cities. And if we're going to attract people to these more rural locations for this, they're not going to commit 30% of what they're going to make to transit to get there. We're going to have to make it, the barrier has to be so much lower to a job for someone to than it used to be. And because it's really the workers in the driver's seat. You make it easy for me to get to that job and I'll go to it. You make it flexible for me to get to that job and I'll go to it. That's not where we were 15 years ago. It was the employer was in the driver's seat and to attract people. So this is, in my mind, as we develop, because I've been saying for a long time, Warden, that we have a non-sustainable imbalance in residential versus industrial and commercial in the county. And this is like broadband. This is like water and sewer. This has to be in your mind as a fundamental service. And it wasn't always in my mind that way, but it definitely is now. If we're going to sustain this county at the same financial level, you're going to have to invest even more than the province does, and you're gonna have to talk to the province even more than you do now about how this is the lifeblood of what we need. We knew it was a need before, but we knew it was a want before. We now know this is fundamental infrastructure. It has to be in place if we're gonna rebalance our economy. So I think we've got a lot of work to do. I just don't want, we've done so much, or I haven't, but everybody else has done so much. I just don't want us to see this as the end. This is just the beginning of what this needs to be and the investments that we need to make.
I totally agree with you. Councillor DeVete?
Thank you, Warden. Through you, I just want to, I agree with everything I've heard so far, so check. The only thing I'd like to add to is when you partnerships and conversations with the city, that's absolutely the right thing to do because that employees are there. But when I talk to businesses in the Kamoka area, some of them are really struggling to get employees. Transit doesn't just run one way. So what I'm saying is this conversation with the city and other sort of hubs in the area is critical because the travel is two-way. We've got people who need to be in there, but we also have people here in the city that good job. Thanks for the exciting times, actually. Building something is always.
Thank you. Councillor Burghardt-Jessie?
Great, thank you. I'm going to echo what Councillor DeVete said. I agree with what's been said. I would take, I agree on the partnership, but I think we also have to look to our neighbor in the city who has been resistant with their transit system to bring their own workers out to their industrial areas to get employees to their own businesses. So I agree that's the route to take. It's going to be an uphill battle because they can't even get their own residents to their own businesses. So I like the idea, you know, all, Taylor, you mentioned all the partnerships, you know, with SCORE, talking about, you know, other neighboring routes. And I really think that that's the key, is getting the message out to our residents, to the user, about how all these routes are connected. You know, we did our little road trip in the summer and we're able to highlight how you could get from one community to another. And that's going to have to be the piece that's just told over and over and over again. And then to Bill's point about investment, you know, that is going to be a decision and I think a very, you know, a big discussion for future council, because we can't just depend on the province to fund this. And our urban partners with their transit systems, they fund them themselves, you know, with subsidized dollars. We have to be able to, much like the cycling center, you know, talk a big talk. At what point do we put money behind it?
That's why we have to keep iterating, because we're not always going to be able to have this kind of funding, but we're always going to need to innovate. And there's, I always say, we don't copy anybody, we kind of lead the way. And I think that's true in so many cases. In this particular case, we're going to have to find a Middlesex solution. There is not a more, there's not a larger road network other than Renfrew County in Ontario that has to be covered by this. Fortunately, our growth patterns are that we're getting nodes now where we have real nodes that are, as opposed to, you know, 2 kilometers between houses. We have real nodes now and real growth in certain areas. So this is more possible than it ever was before. Chances have changed, the need has changed, but we have to adapt with it too. So I'm looking forward to whenever you come back next year and you talk about, okay, here's where we saw things last year and here's where we think we want to go, like a strategic plan of how we would iterate if we had less money. Like that's a fundamental business discussion we need to have. If we had half the money that we have now, what would we do? If we had a quarter of the money, what would we do? And going back to the taxpayer can't be our first option, it has to be our last option.
Might add one thing about, you know, we've said about launching transportation systems during a pandemic when you're asked to stay at home. On the flip side of that, it has empowered you to be creative. and to do different things. And so if you're already looking at a model where you're having to change quickly and having to adapt, then that will only continue. It's not like we've got something set up and everybody's used to something and then you're asking them to change. You've already been adapting how you've rolled things out. So I think that plays into us building this.
Because there was a time where all of us could have went out and thrown a baseball and hit a house that has 3 cars in the driveway. But demographically, the county is changing a lot, and there are folks that are going to be, that next generation of folks aren't driving as much, and we need to, we're never probably going to be a walkable community in my lifetime, like, county, but we can be a transit community in my as a county. That's exciting.
Sure.
Thank you, Warden. Thank you. I just want to reiterate some of the points that everyone has made today with respect to the ability to be adaptable and to have the ear of the province in particular that was out. But I want to make note of the fact that we're also seeing the Government of Canada having that adaptation in mind as well. And so there are some opportunities. And since Peter actually put together the presentation, there has been another announcement. And I know a question that came up last week with respect to education was the integration of many of our departments. You're going to see that because Chris, Andy, myself, and planning and others are going to be integrating and looking at the opportunities that the announced on the 26th. Those include some things that will light up Bill's eyes as well, because they include the zero emissions transit funds, the active transportation fund, and the rural transit. Lots of opportunities to look at maybe some of those options, future lower emissions. Let you know as budget and our departments will be working.
That really has to be our focus, Warden, is that, and also more directed, right? Because, and there are ways to be more directed than a big bus on a big road. And so that's all part of the service we need to adapt to in rural Ontario.
Dr. DeVete?
Oh, thank you. I was just going to, on Bill's comment about the change in drivers. It's not just the young people who aren't driving. The cost, there was a big study that was done by the think tanks, and there appears to be the cost of cars, the cost of owning a car, having 3 cars in your driveway overnight and then driving to a parking lot, sit in the parking lot all day, isn't the cars and maintenance. And there may be changes in how people drive, or even if they but the idea that we so the transit systems will be with will be sitting that are ride share bicycle thing, and there's all kinds of stuff. So this ability to pivot, to be adaptable, to be ready for changes as they come.
It would be really nice if
It'll be different.
in a year or so we're talking about zip cars and about other types of options for transit, so that are out there in other places, or short-term rentals or other things that exist. Maybe we can get there. So beyond just transit. So Cindy keeps telling me, Bill, this is sort of our canary in the coal mine, the launch, but there's other things coming around it, and that's the part that's going to be really exciting.
Through the warden, I'm not sure who this would be to, but we talked a little bit about destinations, and I know, let's face it, there's a lot of people who work on carpooling when it comes to going to work, especially out in the north end of the county. It's quite a drive for the city. So that's been going on for years, but more and more now it's becoming more successful. But the other side of this is, and it was mentioned about residents or workers coming into our communities. We have Tim Hortons owner, for example, who has a van, and he has to go around and pick up his employees. We have another person who's talking about his future plans are to have up to 50 employees in our community. But he's looking that he will probably have to run his own transit system to pick up and take employees back. So that is something we haven't really talked about, that network within the county. For example, for us to have at the north end of the county, for it to have any kind of successful transportation, it has to go to Strathroy. It has to go to Strathroy. We have so many services, our county services, a lot of them are in Strathroy. And there's nothing there at that point right now. So that is done within the community, where community groups are helping to drive people in. And I think, honestly, for this to be successful, in my thinking, is it has to include public transit at some point, has to include that type of transportation where I can get a ride to work in the morning, but I could also get a ride home without waiting 3 hours for another bus after work. So those are the things that I'm hoping that we're heading towards as well. Of course, there's no public transit right now out in our end, other than with Lambton Shores. For me to go to London on public transit, I have to go to Park Hill, Grand Bend, Exeter, Lucan, and then to London. So
That's okay sometimes
but
too.
it starts somewhere.
Yeah, it's a start. It's okay too, because a lot of our, like, if you think about our county, the way it's divided up, I think because London is a big elephant, we think that. But in your neck of the woods, Exeter in that area is much more important for everything. Like, even we found that out really fast on the vaccination trail, Kathy, about how many people were going from your community up into Huron and Exeter for services of all different kinds. And same thing in the south. We see people graduate. So our system has to adapt, and Allison and Kathy and others around here have provided leadership saying it can't be just about into London, it has to be in all different directions. That's what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying. And we have, for example, we have a number of residents who work at Strathmere Lodge. So they're going to they don't care about London. Their world's going to Strathroy, and they do their shopping in Strathroy, or local, hopefully. But that's the part of the puzzle that I'm hoping that we're looking at. I think for it to be successful, at least that end in the real rural areas of it, I think that's needed.
But I think the word puzzle is the right word. It is a puzzle, and it takes a lot of shifting of the pieces to see where it actually creates the big picture. Yeah.
But you talk about partnerships, so I think of this one, I won't do a name, but this one business who wants to expand and have 50 employees. The idea of a partnership with that business owner, I mean, it'd be a lot more profitable and a lot better for him to partner up with public transit rather than have his own van or his own bus. Those are opportunities, I guess, not problems.
And I think, Brian, you'll see that Kara's department is actively working on that, looking for those people that are looking for that type of workforce to be moved. That's what the whole agenda of the workforce planning board is.
Yeah. And I'm not sitting here complaining about the system. That's not it. I'm just saying.
No, I think you're looking for
opportunities. Hopefully that we're growing into that
Yeah.
type of solution.
Yeah, Kara, and then Cindy. Kara, yep.
Oh, thank you, Gordon. So I want to reiterate that issue that you're seeing with the Tim and going out and finding their own workers, that is taking place in other areas as well. I can larger industrial businesses that we profiled last year has hired around 30 new employees in the last year and a half, and same situation. And that manager was coming to me saying, "Do you want to tell the owner he's crazy for buying a school bus?" But they're looking for solutions, and like us, big puzzle, and that's really where that importance comes to that needs assessment, where we look at the expansion of our service. That's where we look to, and I know Taylor's already had some preliminary discussions with Fuego about the nature of the transportation capital that we're using now, and if that's really the solution. an on-demand system and needs of not just the individual, also the employers and others. They're currently running into the same problems that were already brought up in terms of who did work, for Meals on Wheels, and saying, the demand for that kind of service, particularly, they rely on volunteers to be able. A lot of those people will forgo mileage costs, but those demands are too great to be affording the gas and insurance. That's where all of this, all these stakeholders.
I think Cindy, you were next, and then Brian, and then Ina, and then we're gonna have to start wrapping it up soon and move on to something else, because we could talk about this all day long.
Thanks through the warden. I'll be quick. I was going to make some of the comments that Kara made, that real focus on trying to get additional funding, especially to support that on-demand transit and different kind of vehicles. But I think that the biggest thing that I'm hearing, and kind of the direction that we are working towards, is one, supporting our current community transportation pilot that we have, which supports obviously Thames Centre to Oxford County to London, and then also looking at the big picture. So it's really two-pronged that we're looking at and thinking about, and we'll continue to look for other kinds of funding in addition to just what we get for community transit, so we really can move this forward.
Yeah, we know there's availability in, with as far as lowering emissions, that type of environmental approach, and also we do know that infrastructure is, taking the strain off our roads by providing transit as opposed to having other vehicles travel every day, or other focuses on that. Ina?
Thank you. I just want to build on the point that Councillor Ropp made. The issue is exacerbated in the farther reaches. Even I've talked to Tim Hortons in Komoka cannot get people, and for somebody to bring them for some of that coverage that they rely on to peak times. And then there's lawn care service that does exactly the same thing in the area, drives around edges of London, makes the rounds every morning, and it's seasonal. Lawn care is needing a lot of people at certain times, that flexibility. And there are doctors who live in Kilwell, to Strathroy. Traffic is going, it's whole county. And I know part of the problem is attracting the right types of housing for the right people. Cost. Some of those people live in our communities that they could house and the car and all those other things. It's not a simple problem too, because traffics and costs and jobs and
Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Warden. Just a reminder, and I reached out to the City of London last year, who coordinate. We actually have a regional rideshare program that we invest in with the City of London. So people like Councillor Ropp is saying, who want to travel from Strathroy to Park Hill, or I've looked at some of the listings recently, but people going from Strathroy to like Brampton and back have a way to offer up seats in a car and basically share gas to share those rides. It was a little suppressed from what I understand last year and the year before because of COVID. But I've reached out again to the City of London to see if they'll come back. They also have a car share program that they've initiated fairly recently again, which is if you need a car for a day, again, very urban-centric type of solution, but certainly something that we're keeping an eye on closely in the county, just simply because that's the type of transportation demands and needs we're seeing more of these days. But I'm going to ask them to come back and give us an update on regional rideshare, because we're in that with Oxford and Huron County and any of our other neighbors. So I think it's time for an update on that program.
Thank you. Kathy?
I won't take a long time. Just to Ina's point, you hit the nail on the head when you brought up housing. It's that whole holistic piece, and knowing that transportation plays such a part in it. And I think, you've got the warden of the day for this one, because she's got such a passion for transportation, and to use her when you can, because she's an advocate for local transportation. And it's just, again, the timing for this is perfect. She looks at it as a whole piece, and not just in separate puzzle pieces. I think this is a good launching point for going forward, but you've got certainly the ward.
Thank you. All right, I think unless there's a specific question for Taylor or Kara, I think we'll move on. And you certainly poked a stick in the hornet's nest for us, Taylor, and kept everybody planning for the future. And that is one nice thing about this particular piece, is that we are looking forward, we are looking to the future, and we're trying to build bigger and better things. And I think that's a very pleasant topic for days like this. So good.
Thank you.
So we will have social services and housing, and we must apologize to Joe when he gets in here because we are a little bit behind. He's probably been out eating all the donuts by himself over there. All right, I think we're ready to start.
Fan.
Again?
Tape this, Greg, and
Do you want me to bang the gavel? Okay, I could do that. Joe, apologies for keeping you so long over there with the tray of donuts and all the snacks while we went on and on about transit. So the floor is yours whenever you're ready.
Yep, Greg's just going to put it up. And thanks and through the warden. Joe Windsor and I are here to present the social service budget for 2022. I'm going to start with the first few slides, and then Joe's going to take over from there. Next. So as you know, the social service budget is made up of Ontario Works, the homelessness prevention, children's services, and it also includes the social housing piece. Next. So why we do it. The Social Service Department helps residents of the county at their greatest time of need. So we talked earlier about community transportation and housing, definitely where it ties into social services. When life causes hardships, we provide the services and supports people can turn to, or we make those referrals to the community agencies. We'll be talking a little bit about life stabilization, but that's what I mean about that. These are provincial programs that the county delivers. The county has a service agreement with the City of London, who is the provincial service manager. Next. Why we do it. Each service offered by social services has an overarching act, such as the Ontario Works Act, legislation or regulation, which provides a delivery framework for us to deliver our services. Next. Ontario Works and Discretionary Benefits. So it provides temporary financial assistance to our clients. It assists clients in becoming employed and achieving that self-reliance. Income assistance includes allowance for basic needs and shelter. Employment supports are available to assist individuals find and retain employment. And I can say at the county, we've done a good job of that over the years, even during COVID. Life stabilization supports include housing, mental health, and addictions. It's really key for us to connect our residents to those supports so they can move on. And we do everything from eligibility verification to case management to eligibility review to our intake screening, where our residents call in and we connect them to social service. So some of the highlights, 2021. We were lucky again this year, consistent with what we did the previous year, where we had issued additional funds through our COVID-related discretionary benefits program. So this is 100% provincial funding. It really helped our clients with PPE and other basic needs, such as cleaning supplies. In December of 2021, the employment activity requirements for clients was reinstated. So this, because of COVID, they put a hold on some of the employment requirements, but now they're up and going again. I can say, though, the county is taking a stage approach just because of COVID and getting clients really to understand what the rules and regulations are again. In 2021, we saw a 10% increase in clients obtaining employment over the total number in 2021. So that's what we're really proud about. Next. Our staff were mainly working from home. However, there was no service disruption. and we were able to provide our clients with financial, employment, and life stabilization supports. In some cases, the caseworker's connection was the only contact clients had during this challenging time. And again, I want to tie that back to life stabilization. We currently at the county are doing that. Next. The electronic document management system was set up in December of 2021. Social services staff are being trained on how to use this new system. Once up and fully running, it will reduce the amount of files, administrative work required. So the real benefit is that it will allow our caseworkers and other staff to focus on case management and supporting our clients, moving them forward. And that's really what Ontario Work modernization is all about. So if we look at our caseload, you're going to see that drop in our caseload. We really fluctuated from, if you look at 2019 to 2020 and to 2021. If I showed you the 2009 numbers, you would see a huge drop. But some of that is in 2021 and 2020 is because there was other federal benefits available because of COVID. Originally, the province had told us they expected about a 20% increase on the Ontario Works caseload for 2021 to 2022 when those federal benefits ended. We haven't seen that really materialize. However, we may see that more going into 2022 and 2023. I'm going to turn it over to Joe to talk about childcare.
Perfect. Thank you, Cindy, and good afternoon, everyone. Children's Services had a busy year. With the provincial closures of all schools, emergency childcare services were implemented. In January 2021, we had 6 centers that were able to open. And in April 2021, when the schools were closed for almost 3 months, we had 9 centers who were also able to open their doors for emergency childcare. They served 176 unique children. In 2021, we saw an increase in licensed childcare spaces compared to 2020. This number has continued to increase over the past 5 years. The increase is due in part to the expansion of the Elm Childcare Centre in Glencoe and the opening of the Angels Childcare Centre in Thorndale. Next. In 2020, the federal government provided funds through the Child Care Safe Restart Funding and Reinvestment Funds. In conjunction with the City of London, we were able to reallocate approximately $96,000 in 2021 to qualifying licensed county child care centres. Also in 2021, to support the stability of the child care system in the county, we were able to issue 2 one-time General Operating Grants, or GOG, funds totaling $1.4 million to, again, the qualifying child care centres in the county. Next. The Social Services Relief Fund has been successfully implemented over 2020 and 2021. In total, we have received over $1.4 million in provincial funding. The funding has been geared towards our most vulnerable, homeless, and at risk of homelessness individuals and families. Final phase, phase 4, is for a period up to March 31st, 2022, although we will continue to provide supports throughout 2022. Next. In the social housing and homeless prevention area beyond the SSRF, we have moved forward many other initiatives, one being the Homeless Individual and Family Information System, or HIFIS. This system holds comprehensive data which has been collected from each person who identifies as being homeless, living rough, or couch surfing. It is voluntary for clients to provide their information, but the system is designed to help better understand what's happening in our community, to work more collaboratively with our community partners, and to provide the most appropriate supports for individuals and families when required. The data collected from using the system will also support any application for federal or provincial funding that may come available. Next. Funded through the Community Homelessness Prevention Initiative funding, the Community Navigator has been pivotal in supporting much needed housing application supports and general connections to our community partners. In the third quarter of 2021, the Community Navigator supported 141 individuals and families. The success of the SSRF implementation was due in part by having the Community Navigator playing a key role. Next. In 2022, we look forward to many opportunities. The eventual building of the River Heights Child Care and Early On Center and Family Center in Dorchester, the Skills Advanced Ontario Manufacturing My Future Training and Skills Development Program. Some of our staff will start working from the Strathroy Library headquarters once COVID allows us. And finally, working collaboratively with our community partners and communities to provide programs and supports to our homeless population. We have lots to be excited about in 2022. Next. Over the past few years, the province has been working with municipalities to change and update the way social assistance is being delivered. These changes include the province overseeing all financial assistance, and the municipalities will deliver person-centered case management and provide connections to local community supports. Our office will eventually be responsible for life stabilization for not only Ontario Works participants, who we currently serve, but also life stabilization for Ontario Disability Support Program clients. In many ways, our caseworkers already provide these supports to OW and ODSP and the general public when requested. To continue the preparation of the changes, we'll be providing training to our staff through various types that will become available. Next. With any opportunities, there are always some challenges. In 2022, we expect some of the following points to provide some challenges in our day-to-day work. And if COVID has taught us anything, new challenges can pop up without warning. Some challenges that we see and anticipate in 2022 are the following. With the social assistance transformation, the program is changing, which in turn means the technology we use to provide the program will change as well. My Benefits, electronic document management, centralized intake, and e-signatures are enhancements that have already been implemented or will be coming soon. In the Child Care Centre, the lack of registered early childhood educators has caused many issues throughout the county. A few of our centres have had to temporarily close due to lack of staffing and COVID isolation expectations when a close contact occurs. The stressors of recovery from the impact of COVID-19 on our community partners and the aforementioned childcare centres. We have also seen and will continue to see an increase in our homeless and vulnerable populations. This in conjunction with the limited CHIPPY dollars we receive now and no new funding like the SSRS have been announced. It may be a challenge to support some of the individuals and families we support. There has also been an increase in the use of food banks and meal programs throughout the county. Cost of social housing continues to increase, and the lack of safe, affordable market rent housing available limits our ability to support clients in finding housing. With all of these challenges, we are also seeing an increase in complex cases, which include mental health and addiction concerns. Next. As mentioned previously under the social assistance transformation, the two biggest upcoming changes we will see in 2022 or early 2023 are the centralized intake and the employment services transformations. The county is slated to start centralized intake in spring of 2022. This means the majority of applications will be completed through a provincially led process. The county will continue to see a percentage of applications that do not meet the criteria for the centralized intake process. For example, someone who is homeless and does not have access to technology to apply online. For the employment services transformation, the county is under the London Economic Region. The Ontario Works Employment Supports will be transitioning to be under the Service System Manager in late 2022 or early 2023. There are some positive parts of these changes. As we mentioned, caseworkers will be able to spend more time supporting clients through their life stabilization path. Next. So some budget highlights. Ontario Works, the budget line for program costs was decreased by approximately $54,000 due to the assumptions made to the caseload. The provincial funding for Ontario Works administration had also been reduced. In childcare and early years, the formula changes announced in 2019 will once again be offset by a one-time funding from the province. This is to mitigate the impact of the new cost shares expectations. We will see the full effects of the changes in 2023. The administrative cost will be a 50-50 split, and the cost share was reduced from 10% to 5%. And early on, we saw an increase by approximately $27,000. And in social housing, 414,000 in 2022 compared to 2022. Next. This is the end of the presentation. Thank you for the opportunity to share the social services budget. Cindy and I are available for any questions.
Thank you, Joe. Right. I think that it goes without saying this is a complex issue, not only just for the actual contents of what it is, but with the relationship with the City of London too tends to make it a difficult one to navigate sometimes. And knowing some of the presentations we've done about the parity between what Middlesex County receives and our neighboring counties makes it a frustrating one as well. And that's not to say that we don't have a good relationship with the City of London. That's not what we're saying, but we know that there should be more money for us, I think, trying to get across.
In response to that, through the warden, really, especially when you're talking about early on child and family centers, where in the past we received 350,000. You see that we have a small increase to that this year. But that's really one where we see a huge difference between other communities, whether it be Elgin or Huron or Lambton. But I can say that I'm always impressed with the library as our purchase of service client for early on. What they're able to accomplish is just phenomenal. And I would say actually when we go out there and we do meetings with other early on partners in the province, I would say that we are leading edge even with the amount of money that we receive. So that really says something to Nadine and her team. In terms of the City of London relationship for childcare, I'd have to say in the last, I guess, almost 9 years that I've been working here with the City of London in this relationship, it really has grown, and they have really started to understand and learn what rural childcare is needed. So in the past number of years, we've seen the new childcare in Lucan. We've seen the new childcare being built in Glencoe. We also, hopefully soon, will see one showing up at Dorchester with our River Heights. And I'm trying to think, we also had some growth in Strathroy and Mount Bridges. So that partnership has been really huge. But you are correct, when we get into things like administration dollars, we don't get a lot of administration dollars to support our childcare centers. So that does have an impact directly on the county when we're comparing ourselves to other communities.
Councillor DeVete?
Thank you. Through you to Cindy, can you point to anything, or do you have any idea? Why is it that this county, we're a county like others, if they're getting this kind of funding for certain services, how do you explain the difference, or can you point to anything? I mean, I hear you saying we're being really efficient with the early on pieces, and we're being very creative, and we can deliver, Z instead of X with less money than other counties. Is there anything? I mean, I know when we go to delegations and we show the numbers and per capita, the dollars aren't there for a lot of these kinds of services. What are we doing wrong? I don't get why it's so hard to figure out, besides the fact that we're sharing. But I mean, given the numbers alone, it should be kind of obvious.
Through the warden, in response to your question, Councillor, that's a really complex one, because obviously when the CMSM arrangements were put in place with the province, Middlesex is linked in with the City of London. But as we know, when we start to look at how big Middlesex County is, and we are growing incredibly, we're bigger than communities like Huron, but we are linked to the City of London, and the City of London is limited in how much funding that they can provide to Middlesex. So it's not an issue between London and Middlesex in our partnership, because we've never been stronger in our partnership. And we really strive on providing that seamless service for London and Middlesex. However, the issue does come around how much money the City of London gets to support Middlesex. And currently, there just is not enough money for both London and Middlesex in the funding allocations that they get. And that's where we tried to keep going back to the current government and the ministry to talk about that and to really show how big we are at the county, our diverse population, the needs that we're hearing directly from our residents, and also the benefits. If we look at early on and our childcare and even social services, the services and programs that we provide in the county make a huge difference to children, and it really supports them early on. And it's vital for us to get those dollars as we move forward. And it even ties to economic development. We need those licensed childcare centers in our community to attract new residents. And I know I've talked about this before with transportation. When individuals move to our communities, and we're seeing individuals move from Toronto or other areas of the province into whether it's Lucan or Middlesex Centre, they're looking for those services they would have received there. And they don't understand that there's not a licensed childcare spot or before or after school programming or Ontario Works or transportation. So it's those pieces that we really have to emphasize and really show, especially when we're moving towards life stabilization. Not only are they looking maybe for Ontario Works and ODSP, maybe the rest of the community, how are we that link to really support individuals? And then we can talk obviously about social and affordable housing, again, where we need money. Homelessness, we're limited in our funding, and we were so lucky in the last few years to get social assistance relief funding. And we really see the need, especially with COVID, when we funded a lot of our food banks. They had a huge number of individuals coming forward and needing those supports during COVID. That's not going to end at the end of this March when our SSRF funding ends. So we really are going to have to be creative. Joe and I are going to have to think about how do we look for other funding sources, because we've really shown there's a need and a gap in our community, and we have to figure out a way to move that forward for the benefit of everybody.
Councillor Burkhart-Jessen.
Thank you. Through the warden, I know you asked the question, what are we doing wrong? Maybe we flip it and say, what are we doing right? Because I think we can hold our early on program as a gold standard. We've talked about other departments and how proud we are of the work that we're doing. Certainly, what the library's been able to do with the funding that they have, maybe that's the model for other programs. If you look at what we're able to do, the people we're able to reach, the advancements we're able to do with the money that we have, that is something to be proud of. And maybe that is the gold standard. I don't know. We speak so much about, you've been able to improve the relationship or build on the relationship that we have with the city. And I think we can all see that. We can all see the cooperation. Certainly on my time here around the Horseshoe, I can see a better understanding from the city of the needs that we have. But I guess I have to bring up housing, and there just seems to be that disconnect. And I think it was at the last MOC meeting that I sat in on. I don't think it was the city county liaison meeting. It doesn't matter. It was with one of the meetings that we had with county and the manager made the point. She said, "What are we missing? Like, why is it that we can't get the county to understand where we're coming from?" And I flipped that and said, "But you're not understanding what we're asking for with dollars we're investing." And I guess, what can we do to improve that relationship, to try to encourage more investment in the county? We're seeing them recognize the importance of investing in childcare in our communities. When is that, how can we get them to understand investing in the housing in our community?
Mm-hmm. Through the warden, in response to the councillor, I guess one of the things that that we're currently working on, and I think at the county is one thing that makes us very unique, is that we have different departments that come together to work together. So for example, when we're talking about employment, We work closely with economic development. When we come to delivering our services, we've tied directly to our library system and some huge successes with either early on, or we talk about the community navigator. As we move forward with life stabilization, we'll see even more of that, where we have to work together. As we know, our library system is our hubs. However, that's a huge connection to our community. Now, in terms of housing, I'd say because we got that money from our modernization, it really is going to allow us to go out there and really understand the needs of housing all across the county. And I'm really hoping we can use that information to go forward and have some really good dialogue and discussions with the city. Sometimes I think it's maybe that we don't have enough information to provide them, because it seems to be that we're going to need to be the one pushing to provide the research and really tell our story and show our gaps. And I'd say that gives us leverage to talk about what some of the concerns are at the county. And then we're going to have to try to say, how do we then bring them together and have some really good conversations and show them evidence that, yes, we do have gaps. We have a third-party consultant that came in that looked at all of the available information, and we're able to show that. And I think that's kind of the next step that we're going to need. And I know we've been working for the last couple of years with SSRF funding to show the need for homeless, that we do need more money. What they're giving us isn't enough. We do have gaps. So it's really important that we really are able to show the gaps and the concerns and the need in the county.
Well, I think that is key, because of course the other piece in this puzzle is the province, and I think to get anything from the province, even to look at the relationship between the city and the county, we're gonna have to go as a united front. Certainly, the Women's Caucus has had difficulty meeting with the Minister of Municipal Affairs, and you know, that's a key piece in all of this. So, if we can get that information to the city, they can buy into it, then hopefully.
Through the warden to the councillor, I definitely agree. We have to have a united front. We have to get the City of London on side with us, and we have to get them to really understand what our needs at the county, so together we can go ask for more funding. And I'd say we also have to work with our local municipalities, whether it's a council or the CAOs, as we put together our story of what we need. Together, we need to be a united front on that. And I know a couple years ago we had some housing meetings, but we have to pick up on those and we have to continue those. And again, it really comes to, we need to know what we need, I guess is what I want to put it. We've seen lots of growth out there in our community, but it's not around the social and affordable housing piece. And I think that's the next phase.
Councillor DeVete?
Thank you. Through you to Cindy, and that, don't misunderstand, I am very proud of the work that your department is doing, and I think creativity and the partnerships that are being leveraged. And I know our CAO, when I first came to county, I was around and so on, and understand the partnerships that we have with the library and so on. I'm always just amazed that when we do delegations and so forth, that when you show even preliminary numbers, the gaps are fairly evident. You've done the independent research now to show precisely what those are in which areas and so forth. I think that's exactly the way to go forward. That's showing those gaps. And back, and I'm going, what we're doing with dollars here appears to be much more efficient and effective in a lot of ways relative to some of the other municipalities and cities and counties out there. Way your department works with few dollars should be the model across the province. So, you know, using the library network in rural Ontario, where you have structures, partnerships with, you know, those hubs, that's the way to go. And because the argument you hear back from is, well, there's only so much money, but to the extent that you can do 80% with that pile of money, but else can do 95% with it. That's the part that, the pool's this big, let's divvy it up fairly based on how people can deliver. I think we're delivering service really well with the resources that we have. It's time others were innovating and creating new ways of doing things too, to make sure that they're using those monies that they're getting as effectively. And then if they have to work with less, guess what? Then we're all getting a share of the pie and doing better across the board for the whole province, right? So not just the city and our relationship. I get frustrated because when I look at those numbers across the province, I'm going, we're doing a lot with relatively a little, and I'd like that standard applied across the board, and there'd be more money to do a lot more stuff across the province. That's politics, isn't it? So I'm sorry. This is the budget.
Councillor Roth?
Thank you, Warden. It's funny, I had the conversation on Friday with our local MPP about the very thing. You know, if we could get the funding that Huron County, and I'm not picking on Huron County, but that Huron County gets, just think what we could do. Right, that was, and he had showed some frustration to that as well. He understood that as well, and he's aware of that. But because many people have talked to him, I'm sure. But the question I have, so we're talking about the problems with being this close to the city, but is there some benefits to it for our residents who need services? Can we use some of those services, or are we using some of those services in the city as well?
Through the Warden, thanks. So yes, there are some benefits to being close to the city. What we have found are some struggles of some organizations say that they do support Middlesex and London, which is great, but the folks that we serve would then have to come to the City of London, so then it provides transportation as an issue for folks to get to the different places. Now, definitely throughout the last couple of years, we have been working really hard with our community partners to make sure that they come out to, to the county, so we provide spaces through the libraries and other areas to support our folks. So I say that, yeah, it is beneficial to be by the City of London because there are lots of supports working from the City of London. There are absolutely lots of supports for the folks. And what I have noticed in the county is exactly that, is that if folks do want the support, they need to come to the city. So we need to attract more of those agencies and supports to the county somehow.
Thank you. I do have a line item question at some point, just whenever.
You can do it now.
Oh, okay. And it jumped out at me, and that was right at the start. The salaries actually went down $86,000.
Through the Warden to the Councillor, yes. So we did get a reduction in our Ontario Works cost of admin funding. So that is 50-50 with the county and the provincial dollars. So that ties back to our service agreement with the City of London. If our caseload changes, they reduce our funding. I am still in discussions with the City of London around our funding allocations because every other CMSM in the province did get their funding frozen. However, we're still seeing reductions because of our service agreement. So I'm hoping that I can get some additional funding, but we needed to be really conservative when we put our budget in front of you, and that's why you see that reduction. So it's a direct decrease in our Ontario Works funding.
CEO Rayburn?
It was designed in such a way that doesn't reflect their current neighborhoods, and it doesn't reflect their current demographics or geography. It was designed in such a way that if you're looking from Queen's Park, where do you want people to go and access services? So they wanted them to access them in London for this region. And there were nodes created for that reason. So they looked at it, and I was there. I was at the table, and they looked at it, and they said, okay, Middlesex and London have traditionally been together. Elgin and St. Thomas have traditionally been together. Huron's traditionally been by themselves. Let's create these CMSMs. That's about good driving distance to go and get services. And that's how the social services model, because they were reducing the number of agents they wanted to talk to. That doesn't reflect, that thinking does not reflect the current need. Because let's take homelessness, for example. You couldn't find a homeless person in the county 20 years ago, but now you can. And so that was actually really good thinking back then. The CMSM model was really good thinking 30 years ago. That was really smart thinking to create regional hubs. We did it in the hospital system, and it worked well. You can't have University Hospital in every community, but you can have one big center. And so when you ask, or Kathy made a good point about the disconnect. I think it's because some people are still thinking about things from that old model. And if you're in a city's position, you're looking at it going, my job's to build infrastructure. It's not to do it in an egalitarian way. It's to build infrastructure where I see the biggest need still using that model. If you're in the county's position, you look at it and go, I have a need in my community. Where is the infrastructure capital in my community? You're responsible for it. And so that's where the biggest disconnect is we somehow have to get not only county council to think about if the resources are in the region, that's good, but we also have to get the city to realize the resources that are in the region need to be dispersed out to recognize the new demographics. That is the fundamental problem that we have in communication. And if you look about what we've done in land ambulance to look at the inverse of that, we've put resources, even though we're responsible for it, all of the resources are going to the city because that's where the need is. We recognize that, based upon today's stats, this is where these things should be. But if you put the other shoe on and look at it from social services, they're responsible for it, and all the services are going into where they're responsible for without it's not a lack of recognition. It's about priority setting for them and where can they do it the most efficient and effective, and where, there's a perverse incentive too. I'll say it out loud. There's a perverse incentive because they're getting tax dollars from that. And so we need to have a conversation with the province about this model that's 30 years old is not recognizing the new demographics that exist in the county because I'll have, past warden Kathy said to me, boy, I'd really like a communications plan like Huron did. I'm paraphrasing, where they have a couple of people and they have, or Elgin with all these people in their HR department, or Huron and all this stuff. They get that money from the CMSM funding. The reason why we have to do things so innovatively here is because I can't do it the easy way. I can't go out and say, hey, I'm going to create a communications department with the CMSM money, and it's going to do everybody else. I have to go and find the money and do it with slowly over time. So that's why we have to do things different. If we didn't have to, it'd probably be a lot easier to say, hey, we're our own CMSM. If you look at the money Huron's getting compared to us, and we're twice the municipality, that is crazy. So, we talk about with transit about the challenge of what would we do if we had half as much money? We've been doing that for 30 years, that challenge. And that's what makes us great is we've been able to pull it off. But it means they don't have money for the frills. We're going to go to you and talk about communications. That's taxpayer dollars here. That's not CMSM money that's doing it. If you wonder, I get frustrated because I see there's a press release from Huron today about how it's Veterans Day or something, and why aren't we doing that? Well, the reason why we're not doing that is because I don't have a full-time communications department. Why don't I? Not because we don't need one or want one. It's because they're doing it with other people's money. That's not coming out of their local tax dollars. So it's frustrating for sure, but that's a fundamental thinking shift that's needed if we're ever going to solve that problem.
Councillor DeVee?
Thank you. Thank you for that. Part that's changed in 30 years is technology. So if you
I know.
No, I know.
On social housing, the way this council, not other councils, keep score is capital. And so whenever they come and talk to us about what they're doing in social housing or any program, you keep score with capital. And that's okay. I'm just saying innovation and technology isn't ever going to fix that. And it's the mindset that there's a regional resource. The crazy part for me about those regional resources, they're being used more by counties around us in London than they are by us. The CMSM model put us in it. But if you look at where those resources are, they're being used by Elgin, they're being used by Oxford, they're being used by other, like by Chatham. And yet, we're the ones that are paying for those. And to the west, where most of our, like 70% of our folks are in the west, they can't get any further away from those services than they are. Yet, if you're in Elgin, you're right next door to those services. They're all right there. And that's where it's coming from. So we need a fundamental look at that. And that's the kind of thing that happens in the second year of a government, and you should be asking for it. It doesn't come in the first year. We should
So
be,
we have
no,
our
I mean, we
agenda.
should, okay, I should say we should continue to ask for it. I apologize, Kathy. We should continue to ask for it and put pressure on them, because it doesn't come in the first year of a government. That's the kind of thing you look at in year two. In terms
We'll be ready.
And that's the thing that you ask during an election year. You're saying, what's your plans moving forward to address this disparity that is happening and has been happening, and the model that's no longer working? So what are you going to do about it? And that's what we can prepare questions and get that out there. Cindy?
Through the warden, if I can just expand on a couple of the comments the CAO made. In terms of gaps, so I can tell you an example of a childcare gap is when we have a new childcare center opening, a licensed childcare center, and we have one that's just opening up in Park Hill, for example, we had one open up in Thorndale, is they come to us and they look for general operating grant. And we can't give that to them because we are limited. We have to work with the City of London, and there's only so much money available. And then we get pushback from these centers because some of them are operating in Huron or they are operating in other communities, and they're saying, well, we got that there. Why can't we get it from you? So it's very frustrating. I'd say we're very fortunate because we have had a number of new licensed childcare centers open, and we have to tell them up front, I'm sorry, there's no general operating grant. In the future, if it becomes available, we'll let you know. And we're constantly hearing back every year, is there money available now? Is there money available now? So that is one really big pressure that we have. And again, I tie licensed childcare to economic development and really improving the lives of children. And then I'd say the other one is when we're talking about homelessness, where we are seeing most of that money from Chippy go into the city. So they do have a lot of homeless shelters. So in the past, I'd say going back a number of years, a lot of our residents would go into the city to access these shelters. I'd say in the last probably 3 years, when our individuals try to go there, especially like at Christmas and when it's cold in the winter, they're full. So the residents from the county are being turned away. So there is no, it's not that they're turned away because they're county residents. They're turned away because there is no space. So that is a huge concern that has been growing. So it goes back to Mr. Rayburn's comments that the model it doesn't work anymore. Things have changed. The county has changed. We progressed. We've moved forward. The model really needs to move forward with changes like that.
All right, speaking of moving forward, we are, having great discussions. I think it's a very, for generally understanding what's happening and where the pitfalls are, I think these discussions are very useful because they keep us throughout the year focusing on what's important. But do we have any more specific questions regarding the lines on the budget before we move on? If seeing none, then I'll thank Joe and go back to whatever he needs to do today. And Cindy, you can keep marching forward unless anybody needs a quick break. If not, then we're going to continue forward with Cindy. Thanks again, Joe.
I guess through the warden, before we do go on and close social services, but I do want to put a reminder that a lot of those funding models from the province will be changing. So those will be conversations, not necessarily for 2022, but as we go into 2023. So we're looking at childcare. They're looking at making changes to that funding formula. For social services, in connection with the admin piece and also the employment, they're making changes, part of social service modernization. We won't see that in 2022, but we need to get ready for that as we go forward, because that will be additional money that will be required for the county in order to do those services. Nope. Sure, go ahead. I I'm sure that you will have some contributions to this, many contributions to this. Okay, next we're going to do the administration 2022 budget discussion. So who are we? So obviously you can see this is a very large budget. It includes governance, which is council. It includes office of the CAO. It includes the county clerk's office, human resources, the treasury department, legal department, and facilities. Next. So we've seen a lot of COVID-19 impacts across the county, but definitely on these departments. Facilities, the county building has been temporarily closed to the public. We've had physical distancing of staff and enhanced cleaning requirements. Majority of the staff are working from home, and we've seen that switch to the electronic council meetings and of course staff meetings moving to Zoom, and also community meetings in Zoom or other platforms. Next. In Treasury, the 2020 and 2021 audits were done remotely, so this did require additional staff time to complete. Staff are working on a hybrid model. They work from home and in the office. We really need the in-office to complete the weekly check run process, the monthly Ontario Works check run, mail, banking, to complete our monthly and our year-end processes. Finance has new reporting requirements associated with the COVID funding. So we've got additional funding for land ambulance, long-term care. We've seen some for childcare, safe restart. Next. We've seen impacts on human resources, whether it's insurance compliance with the ever-changing rules and regulations, the ongoing implementation of COVID-19 guidelines and policies, COVID-19 health and safety awareness and training for all staff. Next. In legal, we've seen, in addition to its regular complement of work, it's dealt with COVID-related matters, where they work with the local municipalities. Next. Some of our service highlights from the areas. The work completed by the Women County Council Caucus. I included that here because we do have governance in this part of the budget. We've seen 1 full year operation of our community transportation program. We've completed the community safety and well-being strategy. And when we go into 2022, we'll see the implementation of that strategy. We also were very successful in the modernization funding, where we had phase 1, 2, and now 3. Next. In legal, there's been additional work that's been a direct link to some of the planning and growth that we've seen in our local municipalities. We had the management consulting service agreement with Oneida of the Thames. We also have the communication strategy project, which is underway. So it started in 2021, but we're going to see the full implication of that in 2022. Next. We've had that transition strategy underway, providing human services for land ambulance. So if you can remember last year, we put that additional staff in, and then you're going to see in the budget that we also have another position that will be supporting a land ambulance. So in total, it will be 1.5 FTE. We've had successful collective bargaining with Unit 4 Local 302 and QP 2018. We've developed a more robust progressive discipline policy and also commenced the WSIB Excellence Program. Next. Other opportunities was around that automate and modernization. So we're currently working on the payroll process and human resource information system based on recommendations from the consultant, and we're working with our lower tier municipalities on that, and also document management. We're also in the midst of the implementation of the community strategy when we get that. Later on, likely, Marcy, correct, around March, we're going to see the communication strategy. The ongoing development and training of the corporation. So I know Mr. Rayburn talked about this the other day, so succession planning, staying on top of current best practices, technology, legislation, and professional requirements, because in this budget, we do have a lot of individuals that have that professional background, whether it be in legal services, in Treasury. Next. Other challenges that we see is COVID-19 response and staff returning to the workplaces. Changes in legislation that affect legal, human resources, health and safety, treasury, and governance. Our increased competition to recruit and retain talented employees. I know I've talked a little bit about that for myself and my department. And additional reporting for COVID-19 funding received from provincial and federal government. It's always wonderful to get this additional dollars, but there's a lot of reporting that has to go on. And I know just last Friday, we did some additional reporting back for some COVID dollars that we received for land ambulance. So in the good news of that, we're still seeing that come through for 2022. And we'll see that for both our land ambulance and our long-term care. Next. Some budget highlights. So once again, I know I talked about this a lot last year, but we see our insurance costs. They've been updated to reflect expected increase in premiums upon renewal in July of 2022. So this increase in premiums is being experienced across municipalities. Both Mr. Trainee and I reached out to our provider, and they told us, yes, we expect to see additional increases, so we tried to build those in. Hopefully they're enough, but they keep it going up constantly. I know you heard it from land ambulance when they talked about it, and you also heard it from Mr. Trainee when he talked about the insurance piece. The budget includes the union and non-union annual increases. And we also have council and ward and travel and expenses. If you remember, as part of COVID-19 last year, I reduced some of those expenditures. We're really trying to right-size this budget, so I put those expenditures back in. So they reflect traditional budgets. Now, I will say I put them back into, would have been back to the 2019 level, but I didn't increase it to account for anything like inflation. Next. So the Human Resource Department, so we've added in here a new Human Resource position, and this position will support the county and land ambulance. So I do want to point out, though, for a funding point of view, you will see additional funds coming from that recovery from land ambulance for 50% of that position. And we're also going to fund that position, the other 50% of that position, from COVID-19, because we're really seeing an increase of workload in our Human Resources Department because of implications of COVID-19. Really nice direct link to the provincial funding that we got for that. And I will also point out that the amount in the budget for that position is effective April of 2022. So we didn't go all the way back to January. And you're going to see that for a couple of the positions that I'm going to talk about here. And the legal department has also a summer student position. Now, I will point out that they will try to work and they will try to get federal dollars to offset that amount. And hopefully they're successful in order to do that. Next. So you're also going to see there's a new position here for the clerk's department, and this is for the communications position. So we've been talking a lot about communications and the need for communications in the county. So I guess this is another response kind of to the comments that Mr. Rayburn made earlier. As we slowly try to increase things, we start out slow, see how they work. That's really a made in Middlesex solution. So that's why we're only putting forward one resource that will really work with our clerk to improve our communication process here in the county. So I will like to point out that this position, because again, it is directly linked to what we heard from COVID-19, the community needs additional communication because of COVID-19. We will be funding this in 2022 from our COVID-19 funding from the province. You're not going to see it on the summary document when we come to the summary of the budget. Where you're going to notice it is on Friday when we start to put everything together and we look at the budget recap. And if you remember from last year, I had a line that showed COVID. That's where we're going to see it. And there'll be about 100,000 that I'll be able to put in there to offset some of these costs. It's the salary, the benefits, and also the computer equipment that they need. Next. So the Treasury, so this is another large increase that I'm going to talk about. So Treasury is including a centralized procurement services unit, which is a recommendation in the service delivery review for procurement services. You're actually going to see that report come forward on the next council meeting, February 8th. So this would include a procurement services manager and a procurement services coordinator/officer. So centralized procurement services. So the consultant went out and looked at best practices. So they looked at other tier municipalities of a similar size, and they all have a dedicated procurement manager or procurement coordinator. So given the size and complexity of the county, a dedicated resource would provide value for county departments, all the way from land ambulance to transportation and to the library. The intent is to standardize procedures and templates and reduce the risk for the corporation. So procurement services, again, tying directly to that modernization review. So currently the county, and I'm going to talk about local municipalities here as well, have a highly decentralized approach to managing their procurement operations. So if we are doing a new RFP, for example, it may be done in transportation, it may be done in land ambulance, it may be done in economic development. So that's what I mean by its decentralized approach. And as a result of that, we have inefficient operations, we have a duplication of effort, and we have repetitive administrative tasks. Next. So the centralized procurement services, so when I look at that, I'm talking about a service and a team. So the hiring of a procurement manager and procurement coordinator / officer position would allow the county to also support the local municipalities. If we were only going to put one position in, say the procurement manager, that would be able to support the county. If we also want to support the local municipalities, we really have to have both positions. And I'd say both positions would be supporting the county and the local municipalities. A shared service delivery model for procurement services would improve productivity and facilitate collaboration and participating in buying groups. The treasurers from all the local municipalities provided input into the procurement process and service review, and they support a centralized procurement services that would support their municipality. I know some of the larger municipalities have talked about if the county is not going to do that, they may look to go back to their local municipality and add a resource. So this would allow us to really capitalize on economies of scale, again, really build on that shared services model. I'm also recommending, but obviously this is up for you to decide, that we would do this through the levy instead of actually having to go back and do invoicing. I also did talk to the treasurers a little bit about that. What method would they prefer? And they all seem to indicate they would rather put it on the levy. That way they're not always having to, well, first of all, there's all the paperwork associated with that. And then they want to just be able to reach out to the resource and get it when they need it. And that's not always the case. If you're having contracts in place, you only have a certain amount of budget, that's what you need for the year. Next. So if you look to the revenue line, it includes $400,000. If you remember that, that's part of the use of the proceeds allocation, and it replaces that lost rent that we used to have from the health unit. You'll also see in the revenue, where I talked about it before, but that increase for the additional work completed for land ambulance. So the services that we provide for land ambulance include Treasury, payroll, the CIO, of course, and human resources. And I can say for the last number of years, I know how much time I personally put into land ambulance. We are spending a lot more time. It's becoming a lot more complex. And also they're hiring a lot more staff. So the service has been really growing. If I just look at my payroll staff, she's been very busy in the last couple of years just providing support to land ambulance. And then obviously human resources. So we've talked a lot about that transition, and it's, again, a slow transition, what we always like to do at the county, take our time. So really starting probably more in 2019, spending a bit more time in 2020, and definitely we'll be spending a lot more time in 2022 as we go forward. So capital. So there is a bit of an increase in capital. So we have our traditional computer hardware replacement based on hardware life cycle guidelines. I can also point out that because of COVID-19 and how things are changing, staff working from home, a lot of times some of our staff would have desktops. We really are switching over to the laptops. That way individuals can really have that hybrid kind of work relationship where they work in the office or they work at home. So that's been a big shift, and that's part of what's in the replacement. It does cost a bit more money for a laptop versus a desktop, but it allows our staff to be more efficient and effective. We also have a new multi-function printer photocopier. I can tell you from Greg and I, when we have to print off all of these reports, it is really starting to show its years. So it's like malfunctions and things like that, so it is time. So it is $10,000, but it is a very big unit. It provides a lot of services, and it does a lot of reports, especially through the clerk's office or economic development, planning, legal services. Everybody uses that printer photocopier. We also have new computer hardware aligned to new staff positions. So obviously the new staff positions in Treasury, in clerks, and human resources. Again, I want to point out the positions for clerks and human resources will be capitalizing on some of that COVID-19 dollars to offset that. And then the last big piece that would be in there is the iPads. We always put new iPads when we have a new county council. So we'll be seeing that later this year, which is very exciting. Next. So that's kind of the overview of the presentation, some opportunities, some challenges, and some budget highlights. So Greg's now going to put up the big summary document. Can you make it a bit bigger? All right. So if you want, I'll go through a few highlights if that's helpful. It is a very large budget. So, and I'll tie back to some of the things I talked about in the presentation. So you will notice the County of Middlesex, that contribution has increased. You're going to see that amount, just a little bit under 400,000. I'll also remind you again that we will have the offset for COVID, and I said that's at least 100,000. You'll see that amount reduced by. And you'll also see, if you see in that transfer from reserves, you're going to notice that has a huge decline. That's because in 2021, we had that $1 million again from the use of proceeds report, and we don't have that this year, so that's why you're seeing that. You'll see it again show up in 2025, where the recommendation was more money we put away for that. And I think those are the main, and then we talked about the recoveries, mostly from the land ambulance. There's a small increase in the recoveries from the lodge, but that offsets the union increases because they pay for payroll services and treasury services as well. If you can go down further. So again, we can see that the expenditures for governance, so you're going to see the salary. If you remember, we had the the increases for county council, and we decided to implement that over a 4-year term. So 2022 is the last year of that. And then on top of that, we have the non-union increase as well, which is 2%. So that's what makes that up. The warden salary was agreed that the full rate would go in at the first year because it made sense to go over a 4-year period like that. We also, at some point, I know I've been talking to Marcy about coming back to council because we probably need to look at that again since we're at the end of 2022 and whether we do it with this council or if you want to wait to the next council, but we probably should have some conversations around what are other communities and other municipalities paying their councils, and are you guys on par with that or not? And obviously the benefits and the remuneration go together. Actually, there's 2 spots where you're actually going to see a decline in insurance, believe it or not. And actually, I went back to the actuals and I went back to the invoice that we received. So I'm very comfortable that this decrease is okay. But one of the few spots where we'll see that. And then, like I said, I talked about travel and I talked about expenditures, and that's really putting us back to the previous budget. As a reminder, I did decrease it in 2021 because of COVID, but it's really important that we get back to a regular traditional budget year. And the library board, you're going to see a small decrease to the remuneration of the library board, and that's because they're doing less meetings. So I didn't reduce that in 2021, but they're going to continue to do those meetings going forward, so I thought it was appropriate that I reduced that. However, I didn't reduce the money for the conventions. That one's pretty well the same, so there's really no change to that. And obviously the per diems, so I can mention that too. The per diems, also increased year to year by the non-union increase of that 2%. So, go down a little bit, Greg. So administration, we talked briefly about those salaries. So the increase there in the salaries is a combination of the non-union increase. It's also a combination of the non-union and union increases. It also has those additional positions in there. So we have the additional positions in Treasury, where we talked about that centralized procurement service. We talked about human resource, and we talked about the clerks. Again, I'll point out, you see, I talk about gross versus net. You're going to see the gross cost of that there. The salary benefits and contingency, I have increased that for up to 5,000. If you want to go in a little bit more depth about what we use that for, what we're planning to use that for 2022, we probably will go in camera for a discussion around that. We also have in there some small increases. So I'd say those are for education and travel, for the clerks, and for human resources. You also see it for Treasury. So when we've hired additional staff, you really have to make sure that you have some of these expenditures in there for new staff as well. So that's where you're going to see some of those increases. And for an example, I can say for the clerks, because for the education and training, there actually wasn't a budget in there in the past, so we really needed to put a budget in there for this year. Operations, as you know, that covers just a wealth of things, whether it be from cell phones to office supplies. It also includes some software costs as we go for, in the clerk's department, such as going from eScribe, our council. So Laserfiche, there's costs built in for that. So those are kind of some new costs in there. And then we go to audit. I put just a small increase in our audit because we're finding that the auditors, as well as our staff, it takes more time to complete the audit because of COVID-19. When possible, I definitely go back and assign those costs to COVID as long as we have those COVID dollars. So I've been able to do that in the past couple of years around that when we see additional expenditures. We do see some small decrease to consulting. And then you're going to see that large increase to insurance. So I think you heard through the IT budget. So some of that insurance is to offset the cybersecurity for that line, as well as the overall insurance that's covered through this department. And I will point out, I left the tax write-off. So you see the tax write-off there at 400,000. So I've left them the same, and if you look at the revenues around that 700,000 supplementary, I left those the same as well. Those are another opportunity where it makes sense, and if we're not getting the funding that we should be getting or we expect to get based on past practice, it's another example where I can go and look at the COVID-19 funding and maybe apply funding for that, because if we think it's a direct link to COVID-19. So that's why it's better just to keep the funding how it is. But in your background documents, I also show kind of like a 6-year history. So the tax write-offs and the supplementary revenue are really on par with what we've been seeing over the last 6 years. So we just have a couple of those transfers to the reserve. So the 125,000, that's the insurance deductibles. We do that every year. And then you can also see that transfer to capital, which is the 55,300. When we go down lower, you're actually going to see the breakdown between new hardware, the regular ongoing hardware replacement. We have facilities, which is really our building and our building manager. So there's not really a lot of increases here. I really tried to keep that constant, even though I know there will be inflation and other cost, fuel increases and things like that. But I went back and took a look at how much money was spent in 2020 and 2021. And I'd like to point out, again, these are just projections because we're still working on year end. You're still going to see some of those numbers increase as we work through that process. But other than insurance, and again, and the insurance cost did decrease here because we no longer have one of our buildings. So we were able to take some money out of that. So 2 spots that we have a decrease in insurance. And again, I already pointed out what this transfer to capital meant for that $1 million. It was in 2021. We'll see that again if we follow the proceeds, use of proceeds document. MPAC, we see a small increase in our MPAC. We get the letter and it actually says no increase, and then you read a little further and we had an increase. So it's a good thing I read the whole letter. And then you can see the community transportation. We had quite the discussion around the community transportation.
Just on the impact thing, I think it's important that's for the lower tier as well.
Yes.
Like, you're not getting a lower tier bill. We're paying that regionally for you, lower tier as well. So there's a long list of things where that are that way, where we pay them, but they're really a lower tier cost, but they come to us and we pay them. We can get into those someday, but sometimes we get people, especially at the lower tier, say, what do we get or whatever, and there's a lot of those things that are listed like this that are being paid regionally as opposed to being paid at local level, even though taxation is the most local thing you can get. It's definitely not even a county thing. But we still pay it here, and it's always been that way, and we're not proposing we change it. I just want you to know that that's the most local thing you can have, and it's paid regionally.
And then we talked a lot about that community transportation project. Again, that's the amount that was in the original transfer payment agreement. But we definitely have funds that we have available if we want to do some of those projects, as we're looking to do on-demand transportation. And then obviously we want to be able to use some of that money as we go forward into the later years, into year 6 and year 7 type of thing. So we're in a good position, but that is all 100%. So if there's anything above that dollars that we're spending, it is 100% provincial, or money that we receive from advertising, or money that we receive from fares. And again, there's no county contribution for that. And then we have COVID-19. So as part of our year-end process, and that ties back to our surplus, is that if any department is showing, so we have an actual projected amount there of close to 20,000, that will be directly covered by the COVID-19 money that we got from the province. So as you remember, the money, we kind of spread it over 2020, over 2021, and we'll also have some available for 2022. So we really try to maximize the use of those dollars to support our operations. And we'll talk a little bit more about that on Friday as we go through the big discussion and strategy. And we're kind of pulling together right now our COVID and what we think some of the things that we can align. So again, if you had additional expenditures or if you had any lost revenue, if we can directly link it to COVID, we can put it through for that funding. And the last piece on here is our capital. So again, we have some software licensing. We also have our computer hardware. We put that as a replacement. So again, if I know some of my Treasury staff, for example, it's time for them to switch out their computers, and we're going to switch them over to laptops. We also have computer hardware new, which again, that is for new staff, which I will offset with COVID-19 for a couple of those positions. And then we talked about that office equipment replacement of the 10,000 machine.
There's a lot of discretionary things that are new. Like, this is probably the budget where there's the most discretion, maybe not in volume, because I know we still have to hear from Brent, but this is a lot of new discretionary things that are just commonplace in other counties they talked about because they're getting the money from elsewhere that are now going to go on the levy because they're needed. And there's things that are changing. Like, we talk about demographic changes. We definitely need a better communication strategy because our demographics have changed. The time has come. We held off as long as we can. And whenever we're talking to council about these changes, I'm going to say, don't look at them as new costs. Look at that we did it without these new costs for 20 years. Other counties have had these things, like huge HR departments and communication teams and other things. You should think of it as a savings for 20 years that we gave the taxpayers instead of a new cost, because that's really the way I look at some of these things going forward. But this is a very heavy discretionary budget for the first time in a long time, I think, Cindy.
The warden, yes, I definitely would echo the comments made by Bill, and especially like I'm talking about the procurement services that we put on there. If you remember that I did bring that forward last year, And then we decided that we would apply for modernization funding so we could have a review of the whole procurement service, not only at the county, but also local municipalities. So that is a direct result of what we're going to hear, and you're going to hear it next, the next council meeting, the full overview of that. But I took snippets a little bit from that report. But again, it was a discussion at the county level. It was also a discussion with all of our local municipalities. So I'm trying to bring forward something I think we heard, not only from a consultant, but all of our staff and our local municipalities, that they felt that this was really important. That's why it's on there, but discretionary.
Thank you for that, and thank you, J.O., for commenting about the 20-year. The other part of it, of course, is that, sure, it shows up in the budget now, but there are benefits that we can't really quantify. So, yeah, it looks like a big hit here, but foundational work, the modernization pieces have been looked at, have professional people doing this, that, and can't keep overloading our existing staff with that because there are costs to that. So I don't have a lot of problem with putting in resources that'll make operations and provide services that are needed. So it might look, I mean, how many adding in 1 year? We're doing all those.
I think I'm part of the problem on that, Warden, because it takes a lot of Cindy will tell you it takes a lot of convincing for me to add anybody. It's really hard for me to get my head around adding new bodies, like, because one of the things that is I find to be terribly inefficient is when you have half a need but you have to add a full body, right? And so it has to build up, and I ask people around here to take pieces of things until we're almost asking for 4 times what that one person would do, and then it's time. And in this department, this budget area, everything you said is 100%, 200% true. To be hyperbolic, but I mean in the HR thing, it took a lot of convincing for me to understand how much that is going to save us, not only in bringing people in, keeping good people, lowering our total costs. I didn't see it for 20 years because it maybe wasn't there for 20 years. But I definitely see it now, and I'm ready to invest in it because, living with it for 2 years now, Chris, right? It's been 2 years. It's maybe a little bit more than 2 years. I see everything you said every day, and that's really important to me. On the procurement piece, I don't see that as much at the county side, but I hear from my local colleagues that they will see that every day. So the good news is that once it becomes evident, we act, but it's a really high bar to come to you with these things. They'll tell you it's a really high bar, but now we believe everything you said to be 100% true about what it'll save down the line.
And we have the same problem at our levels too. I mean, hiring a full-time person to do something, like you said, they're only 3/4. What are we going to do with the other piece of it? Or, we only need a quarter person for that. Not really. Share in administration, and people can wear different hats for different departments. I mean, we had a communications person who also did this and this, and and it gets to a point at which you say, now we really can keep an X. Like you say, it has to come to a point, though.
It has to be a struggle for a long time. Like, I remember the day that I thought about communications the first time, and it was whenever I was in that meeting, I think I told you about, Kathy, with Frontenac, about ambulance. And I started thinking about it, and they had 2 people there at almost all their meetings about communication. I'm like, we can struggle through this a little while longer before I can convince myself that we actually need one person. And it took it's like an 8-year process almost before you actually get to this process where you go, okay, it's too late. I mean, we definitely need someone now. And that's the assurance I'm going to give council, is that we won't put anybody, I hope even long after I'm gone, we won't put any new bodies up on there unless we can prove that it was needed 2 years ago, and that we've been struggling through using sort of our resources, extending our resources until it's just not sustainable anymore.
And through the warden, if I can make one final comment, if we do move forward with the centralized procurement services, I did make a commitment to all of the treasurers that I actually would build that service with them. So it would definitely be made in Middlesex solution and really be able to respond to what the local municipalities need.
And, you know, one of the funding platforms is the modernization money. And that's what it is for, is to modernize. So you can sit underground and develop, and then one year pop up as a butterfly, but at some point it has to happen, right? You have to go ahead and do that.
This is that without that fire starter, we would not have done many things, because it takes real guts to come in front of you and say, we think this is going to be a good idea, and we want to go get tax dollars from every one of these people to try and do it. But if the province comes to the table and says, we're going to give you some modernization money to see whether this works, and we'll save money, and then you can sustain it, that's a winning model that I've been fighting for. We've all been fighting for that for a long time. So it is really, like, Ontario needs a lot of credit for that modernization funding, because ultimately that's going to lower costs for taxpayers for generations, is that work.
Certainly kept us busy. Okay, any other comments? Yep, Councillor Jeff.
Thank you. I won't, a lot of the comments that Ina and Bill have said, I was going to make. But a couple things. First of all, I think it's a big step for Bill to expand departments, because in your world, you do everything. And that's just how you operate, and so that's how you think every department should operate. We've often talked about layers that we see with other administrations of, you know, assistance and that sort of thing. And so I think what we've seen, though, is as Middlesex County has grown up, we do need to grow with that, and we need to be professional. There are certain things that we need to add. I'm actually quite excited by this budget. There is no secret, I have been a strong proponent for communication strategy, communications person. I think that that's vital in today's age, and so I am very excited about it. And as for the modernization piece, it's funny that you should bring that up, because I think it was in today or yesterday in my Facebook memory, was from my first and only in-person Western Ontario Wardens Caucus meeting, and Steve Clark was there, and I was able to talk to him directly about the work at that time 2 years ago that the county was doing, and how we were so excited about that program. And again, it's this gold standard of us taking, you know, running with something that's put in front of us and being able to do so much with that. So, you know, I just think it's time to invest in this particular department. You know, it may not be as flashy to the ratepayer that, you know, we're buying a new photocopier, but it is pivotal to the business that this department needs. So I'm quite excited about what you've presented. I do have a couple questions just on the procurement positions. And don't need to keep rehashing it. But you have spoken. You did say about putting it on the levy, which I'm supportive of. And I guess I just want reassurance that all of our municipalities are on board with this, and that there's not one or two municipalities that wouldn't be taking advantage of this partnership. So that's question one.
Through the chair to the councillor. So I can say that all the local municipalities were part of the procurement review that was done. And again, you'll hear on February 8th, and maybe we'll hear a little bit more after we come through that meeting with County Council where it's talked about. They all were part of that. I had a meeting a few weeks ago with the local treasurers, and I asked all of the treasurers who were on that meeting if they were in support And that also included, well, it included, I believe almost everybody was on there. Strathroy-Caradoc, Adelaide Metcalfe, Middlesex Centre, Thames Centre, Southwest Middlesex, North Middlesex. So it was a pretty fulsome conversation. And I indicated that I would like to add these departments. I would like to add this service. They were very supportive of that. We talked a lot about if we wanted to do this as a shared service where we're doing billing, very similar to what we do for IT, or if we wanted to do something more like the levy, which is more similar to planning. I heard overwhelmingly that everybody there wanted to put it on the levy. That's why I'm coming forward with this recommendation. So I guess fully, can I respond to that? I probably can't until we heard directly from those county councillors from those areas. But we made sure that we went out there and had the conversation across the county.
The other good part about that is the math actually works out pretty well for a levy type service. Like, you know, Kathy, there's some things we do and put on the levy where there's like if bridges, for example, would be one of those things where the people with the lowest assessment have the biggest need. This is actually one that lines up pretty nicely to assessment, and so I feel really good about it being on levy as opposed to other types of services.
Then just a couple other ones, and this isn't a big deal, but I know at our local level, we've talked about actually preferring a laptop over iPad for the counselors. So I just think with eScribe that the iPad is a much better platform than the iPad. So I know you've got in there that it's purchasing iPads, but I was thinking that it was going to be laptops, but that's, I think, okay. And then two more, if I can, just on the rent piece, the parking fees, you've got that we still should be bringing in 60,000. Where is that coming from?
Definitely. So that is our parking lot. So I have kept it at the 60,000. I'm going to go back to the conversation around provincial Cobit dollars. So in normal times, our parking lot is very busy. There's lots of activities that happen in the downtown area, and individuals park, and we receive funding for that. Obviously, in the last couple of years, because of COVID, things haven't been open. So we haven't received as much funding. So I made sure that I put in there our budget that's consistent with previous years. So that way, if we don't get that funding, I'm able to apply COVID dollars to the budget line.
Are responsible for and access it, yeah. So anyways, we get the revenue from the parking lot for a couple more years yet.
And then just my last question is just on, and you mentioned about perhaps having to go in camera. I wasn't necessarily questioning the increase in the 5,000. I don't think I asked this question last year about what that line item is for salary benefits contingency. That's not a line item that we have in my local budget, so I was just curious as to what that is used for. If I don't know, that can be answered offline. That's fine, as opposed to going in camera or whatever. It's under administration salary benefits contingency. But as I say, okay, yeah. I say I'm unfamiliar with what that would be used for.
Any other questions? So I'm just looking, it's now 10 to 12. Do you want to keep pushing forward through a couple things here, or do you want to adjourn for the day? I just want to know what everybody's feelings are. But just looking at, well, I've got presentation by Cindy, and then it says Middlesex London Health Unit, Reserve Funds, Tax Rate Stabilization, and OMPF Fund. So
through the warden, we can briefly talk about those. So the first.
Kathy, what's your schedule like? Brian? Ina? Good? So 15 minutes more? Is that what you want to do, or is that what you're thinking, or?
Through the warden, it won't even be that long.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I just think the more we knock off, the better we are, right? Okay, off you go, Cindy.
Yeah, just seeing which one comes up first. Just throw up there the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund, OMPF. Yes, it's in the appendix. All these are in that appendix. Yeah. So this is just the funding that we get every year. So you'll see there's the first quarterly payment, but you'll see the total amount, which is, small numbers, $367,600. I guess the biggest thing I'd want to point out here is every year at the county, this number has been decreasing. And the result of this decreasing, of course, it's got a big impact on our residents because then it hits the levy. So I know every year we try to advocate and see if we can get additional funding for this. This is a very rural kind of funding that we get from the province, but I guess the biggest thing to point out is the decrease that we've been seeing over the number of years. And I believe the majority of lower tier municipalities have seen that decrease as well. I know that some, like Middlesex Centre, has seen an increase in that, and there are some, but overall we are seeing decreases in that amount. So that's basically what that line item is just to show. It's just a revenue. Next. Yep. So we can, the next one is just going to bring up, we pulled this little spreadsheet together because the health unit hasn't actually approved their budget. So I believe they're going forward in February. So it's usually after that meeting in February, I'm able to actually pull the actual budget. However, we do have the preliminary budget that's in front of you. So you will see an increase in 2022 compared to 2021, which is about $128,000 increase. I have invited Middlesex London Health Unit to come to County Council on the March 8th, if I'm correct, meeting for the budget. And they will talk a little bit about what's going on at the health unit, and they'll talk about the reasons behind this increase. I will point out that we've also been notified by Middlesex London Health Unit that for the 2021 budget, they actually will have a surplus. And the surplus is around $120,000. So we'll be able to put that surplus into our tax rate stabilization. So that really will be able to offset this increase that we have for 2022. And then, as far as I know, they still expect to receive provincial COVID-19 funding for all of the additional expenditures they have that's related to COVID-19. I haven't heard anything else. Obviously, if they don't get that funding, that would be a bigger pressure that we'd be seeing from the health unit. But that's very similar to what we've been seeing from land ambulance. And the last piece that I just have in front of you is I like to show you the reserve that we have for the tax rate stabilization. That really does come into effect when we start to look at the budget and the increases. And if we are able to reduce the increases that we have year over year, we've traditionally looked to that tax rate stabilization to offset that. So you'll notice if you're in the column that talks about the 2021 projected, you will see in there the transfer to the reserve, the surplus, which was a fairly hefty surplus that we had last year. Again, the surplus comes back to because we were not able to run some programs, or we had reduced travel or convention expenditures that helped made up that surplus, all definitely related to COVID-19. We also were able to apply some of that COVID-19 funding from the province. So it's a combination of the two things that were able to give us a big surplus there. I will tell you that we will see another surplus in the 2021 when we finish doing all of our reconciliation. Again, looking back to see what we can apply that COVID-19 funding for. So we will be able to put that back in the tax rate stabilization again. And the one thing that will be a little bit different that we had in there, if you remember, we had the additional cost for land ambulance, which was $310,000. There was about a $50,000 piece that Middlesex County had to pay for, and that directly offset went into the tax rate stabilization, so I can make sure that we balanced our budget, because we did revise our budget for that. So if anybody was to go back and look at numbers, if that's what's missing, is probably around the 50,000 for that. And then obviously, when you show the projected for 2022, if we were to take any money from the tax rate stabilization to offset the tax increase, we would show that in that line item as well. Obviously, I don't have that in there for this year, but that's part of our conversation. But I thought it was just important that you've seen how much money was in there and how much money we had to work with if you wanted to look at that to reduce some of the tax. I think we're pretty healthy right now.
All right, so that concludes today, and we'll look forward to Friday.